1, 2, 3. Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
We're back.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Hey,
I feel like this is the second show we've done in this short football season that's been a Thursday night Philadelphia game.
No, this is their first one. Maybe
there's something else that was going on.
We just saw it like, I watch bad football, so I'm always paying attention to whatever's happening on a Thursday night.
It's just nice in my mind that if we hear like you randomly swearing at stuff, for once it won't be me.
Yeah,
this would
be the perfect week to bring a bad creepypasta on, because then I could like pull the excuse of like, no, I'm not mad at the story. I'm these Eagles, you know.
As you look up the score and they somehow managed to beat Tom Brady like 57-14.
It's fucking, it's just, they just cream him. But I'm just like, but they missed that one 5-yard pass. Pieces of shit.
That 87-yard play could have easily been 88, but they saw anyway.
Yeah. This is the non-essential podcast. It doesn't have anything to do about sports, but my favorite football team's playing right now, so I'm going to be half invested.
This shows how dedicated we are, because your favorite football team's playing, but for me, the Columbus Blue Jackets opening nights tonight. They're playing right now too. So
fuck it. There's a million hockey games. There's only,
Well, and my hockey team's kind of in a similar boat in that they're supposed to be pretty garbage this year. Although they're winning. Last I looked, it was 2-0, and I think they've got a couple more goals since.
At least your opening night wasn't against fucking Vegas. And they lost against some bullshit
They got jobbed on that call. Yeah, I've seen kick goals where you're like, you can't prove he like physically kicked. That was like a soccer fucking punt into the net. Yeah, I don't know how you.
I mean, it was a kick. That was the thing. Like, he turned his foot. Sorry to talk about hockey, everyone, but he turned his foot and kicked the puck into the net. And listening to ESPN assholes like bend over backwards trying to describe a kick without using the word kicking was so fucking annoying. It was like, well, he didn't kick it. He positioned his foot and then propelled his leg. And it's like, that's a kick, you motherfuckers.
Yeah.
And it's like, I said it to my friends. We were watching that game, and I said, I want that to count because it looked cool. But according to their own fucking rule, that's a kick. And I always thought that was a weird rule, because it's like it can come off any part of you, but not if you shuffle your foot towards it. Yeah. It's like, why? It's like just say what you want the rule to be. You don't want somebody to kick another guy in the throat with skates on. That's all your rule is for, because it's fucking dangerous. So it's like, just don't use your skates as a weapon.
So anyway,
anywho,
like you said, despite what we started this week and last week, we're not a sports show. This happens to be going on in the heart of sports season.
I use sports to cope with life. Which
is why we're both so miserable all the time, because sports suck.
Yeah, it's not a good philosophy. A doctor wouldn't recommend it. But when we're not doing that and getting mad at fucking people wearing, fucking clown colors while they catch a ball, we tell each other stories on this show, and they can be about whatever. They are about whatever.
Anything and everything. And this week, I don't have a creepypasta. I really thought I was gonna have to resort to that. And we talked about it last week. I can't remember if on air or after, but it's just very busy, I mean, I almost felt like one of these like grown-ass adults with one of these like fancy jobs, because we flew somewhere and back the same day. Like, I've been on an airplane like 4 times in my life, let alone like going somewhere and coming back like it's just your normal commute for the day.
Yeah.
So busy week, but I did find a topic, and not a creepypasta, but it does keep in like we joke about, like, we don't really do a Halloween theme because most of our shows are kind of Halloween themed anyway. But this isn't going to break that tradition either. So something right in that vein. So according to legend, sometime around 1510, a man named Edmund Dudley was found guilty of attempting to overthrow King Henry VIII. Edmund was beheaded, which seems to have been like a favorite pastime of Henry. If you know anything about Henry VIII, it's probably that he cut a lot of people's heads off.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't the only one, but yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Beheading was big, and it's on the come up in 2021.
Everything's cyclical. I mean, yeah. But to make matters worse, it was said that as punishment for his treachery, the Dudley descendants would also be forever cursed.
The Dudley descendants.
Yeah. I'll be 100% honest here. What drew me to this story was the name Dudley.
Yeah.
It's probably pronounced completely different, but I don't know.
Wasn't Dudley like Harry Potter's shitty cousin or whatever? It was just a fat, miserable piece of shit.
That's a good question. It was something along those lines. Yeah. And then for me, because I'm an old fuck, Dudley just reminds me of Dudley Do-Right, the like kind of in cartoon with Rocky and Bullwinkle. He was the Mountie that was always fighting the handlebar mustache guy.
Yeah.
Anyway,
as he should. Fuck that.
Well, right.
Fuck that.
Anybody
stash.
with a handlebar mustache. Yeah, right. So the curse would soon rear its head when Edmund's son John tried to arrange a marriage between his son, which would so be the grandson, Guilford Dudley.
Guilford?
Yeah, Guilford.
This is just you here, making like you actually did write a creepypasta, didn't you? And you're just making these names up.
It's one of the themes with Dudleys is that they can't name their kin.
To be fair, what would you do a first name for Dudley that would not be funny?
Dudley.
Dudley Dudley. Hilarious. See? You can't do it.
But anyway, so John, who was the son of the beheaded guy, arranged a marriage between his son and King Henry's successor, the Lady Jane Grey. If you're familiar with the confusing and bloody history of the English crown, you probably already know that this plan didn't work out. Lady Jane Grey, upon being appointed to the throne, was basically immediately thrown in jail and eventually executed by beheading. Her rule lasted all of 9 days. She's known as the 9-Day Queen.
But what a great 9 days they were.
Imagine what a
we loved.
We talk about like our lives changing fast. Be like, oh yeah, you're like the kind of bastard daughter of this fat ass like Henry VIII, and he died, and now the throne is yours. You're like, what? Cool. And it's like, oh, by the way, you're in jail now for no reason, and we're going to behead you. It's like, what? Like, I didn't even want the throne to begin with.
I'd be like, hold the fuck up. Don't I own the jail?
Right.
I say you're all in jail. That's the thing. You had 9 days to consolidate your power. You fucked up.
Yeah,
first thing you gotta do if you're like given the crown out of nowhere is like you gotta like make sure anyone who could fuck with you is like beheaded, because they'll
right, or knows that like at least enough of them that the rest know like, yeah, slow your roll.
Right.
But so yeah, the plan to wed didn't work out, but also because of the affiliation, where they apparently were far enough along with this that they're like, oh, you're on her side. John and his son Guilford were also beheaded.
Damn.
Yeah, so they hitched their horse to the wrong wagon there. Or hitched their wagon to the wrong horse. I don't know what the fuck.
I don't know what you Dudleys do with wagons and horses. It's all.
So around the same time that all this was going on, John's brother, what was his name? I lost my spot here because I scrolled, and that's... Okay, around the same time, Guilford's brother, not John's brother, who had been serving as a military officer in France, returned home. He brought with him a very contagious and very fatal disease, which then spread through his fellow officers and soldiers, eventually leading to the deaths of thousands of people in England.
That's a lot to put on him, you know?
It really is, because at the time there was like... It was literally the plague. It wasn't the Black Plague or whatever, but it was one of the many, many, many plagues that plagued. So Yeah, and pretending you can trace it back to like this one Dudley dude that came back from France, that seems like a stretch to me, but it makes for a good story.
Yeah. A happy ending.
So by the 1700s, William Dudley had left England and had resettled in America. His sons, first starting with Gideon Dudley, ended up settling in a place near Cornwall, Connecticut. The area would soon be christened Dudleytown. All one word, by the way, not Dudley and town. It's Dudleytown, or Dudleyton.
Dudleyton. I like Dudleyton.
There's a W in there. Yeah. Unfortunately for the Dudley brothers, despite their father having left England, and also despite the small fact that none of them were in any way related to the Dudleys that I was just talking about in English history, they only shared the same name. But the curse seems to have also a desire to change the scenery and followed them to Dudleytown. Now, Dudleytown is located in a rocky, heavily wooded area of Connecticut at the foot of some nearby mountains, which keep the area heavily shaded for much of the year. That is to say, the land is not ideally suited to farming. But when Gideon, followed by his brothers Brazali and Abiel...
What the fuck?
And... Yeah. It's the first one I'm probably fucking up because it's Barzallai. So Barzallai. And then I thought it was just a weird spelling of Abel, but it's got to be Abiel because it's Abiel.
Abiel.
Or Abiel. Yeah.
Abeli.
So anyway, those are the three, like... You start with Gideon, you're like, that's kind of a weird name, but it was normal for the time. Yeah, so they liked him, and then the other two came along. They're like, these fuckers, we're going to name them Barzallai and Abiel.
Everybody keeps fixating on Dudley. We gotta draw their attention away with even crazier names.
It's safe to say all three just went by the name Dudley. You know how, like, I never really had a nickname. People just say, hey, Gibson. It's like, it's like they got to the... point, it's just, hey, Dudley.
It's like Ed, Ed, and Eddie, so it's Dud, and Dudley.
Dudley, yeah. Anyway, despite the land being, like I just said, heavily wooded, rocky, and not a lot of sunlight, they bought land specifically for farming. And soon other families followed, including a Martin Dudley, who was also not related to either Dudley brothers or the cursed Dudleys of England.
This is just apparently
there was just like
this is gonna just,
Dudleys.
Yeah, this is going to just be a bunch of assholes thinking they're the first people to like be named Dudley to go to Dudleytown.
Right. But so while Martin Dudley was unrelated... Yes, that's what you do if you're founding a town that's not ideal and you need people. It's like you call it Stevetown, and all these Steves are like, I gotta live in Stevetown.
To be fair to Dudleytown, anytime I've ever played Monopoly, I've changed basically every town I've bought or street I've bought to incorporate my name somehow.
See,
it's Pennsylvania, Bennessee.
It works so well.
And the sad fact is, I can do it with every single one because Avenue. There you go.
Avenue. So yeah, if nothing else. The funny part, I didn't really get into it in my notes here, but the Dudleys weren't the first to settle this area. It was some other dude, and they bought the land off of him. So it's weird that like this other guy bought all the land, and then the Dudleys came along, and they're like, Dudleytown. So like the initial guy was like, fuck, why didn't I think of calling it after me? Like, yeah. But anyway. So a bunch of people ended up moving in. Martin Dudley, like I said, wasn't related, at least initially, but he did go on to marry one of the other Dudley's daughters.
Nice.
So that had to make for a really awkward wedding invitation. So
Dudley and Dudley are getting married.
Yeah. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Dudley and Dudley to be held in Dudleytown.
It's gotta be kind of nice. Like, it's the one time without incest you get to, like, not... there's no question about your last name. Like,
it happens. I've actually met people like that where they had the same last name and they got married, but they're not related. Especially if you got a real common name.
Yeah.
But it would still be awkward because you'd be spending the whole damn ceremony trying to convince everybody that you are not in fact related. But it'd be really, really convenient for the woman because she wouldn't have to change her name at all.
I mean, I have it really rough because, like, I'm still waiting to find my soulmate who's also named Ben Matlock. And it's really hard to find a girl named after an old lawyer TV show.
Yeah. One day, there's got to be one out there for you. Maybe she's listening right now.
Hey, email me. Tell me if you know the theme song to that stupid fucking show.
I'm reading my wedding invitation thing, and I'm starting to think there was some guy that, like, probably made it into, like, because Dudleytown, and I'll get into it here in a second, never, actually, my next paragraph here, so I'll just get into it. Farming never really took off. At its peak, the area, and the peak was like 100 years after they initially founded it. It was still only home to 26 families, not 26 people, but 26, houses. It never had any of its own stores or schools or hospitals or even a cemetery. So it was one of these, like, Dudleytown. And I found out, like, in my, like, relatively recent years that where I live in Ohio, there's a lot of these little places. It's like, oh, by the way, that's Beaver Creek, Illinois, or Illinois town, because where I'm in Ohio, obviously. But, like, they name shit after other states. And you're like, there's a city there, and you look it up, and it's like 4 fucking houses that at some point in the past, people decided to, like, incorporate as a town.
Yeah.
So, like, nobody actually uses it. You wouldn't mail something to that city name, but that's kind of what Dudleytown sounds like it was.
Yeah. Really cool.
Yeah. So, like, somebody arrived at the actual town one day and was just like, Dudley and Dudley got married in Dudleytown. Dudley got married in Dudley. So it was like the Hodor guy from Game of Thrones. Like, everybody thought he was just touched in the head. I was
thinking it was like how you can say buffalo, 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 and that's still a coherent English sentence. And it's like the same with Dudley. Dudley. You
just got to add a town to the end of one of them.
Dudleytown.
And doesn't Dudleytown sound like a place that, like, Mr. Rogers would visit, like, in a show? Like,
it sounds like some, like, old play's idea of a rough neighborhood. It's like,
oh, the cheetahs of Dudleytown. Don't mess with those boys, Mariel.
But Dad, I love him.
So farming never really took off. Like I said, at its peaks, 26 houses. But that's not to say that it was a failure. When iron was discovered in the area, families in Dudleytown began mining ore as well as producing and selling timber could be burned down to, I think they called it, like, timber coal. So wood coal, that was used to power the nearby foundries. So for a time, like, the families that lived there, even though it was very kind of, like, out there and small, they were pretty successful. They weren't, like, destitute and just, like, eating dirt. But eventually both those industries would dry up. I had a good run. Eventually it was abandoned in, like, the late 1800s. But I wouldn't be talking about Dudleytown if it was just a story of a moderately successful for a while village of up to 26 households.
Moderately successful incest village.
In fairness, none of the other families were Dudleys.
Yeah.
They said some of their names. I didn't write them down.
That's
but
bullshit.
Yeah.
They changed them.
They better have. I mean, it's town law. So anyway, like I said, I wouldn't be talking about it if it was just if that was a regular story of a town that, like, was founded and then eventually went away. The Dudleys, even if they're not the Dudleys, are supposed to be cursed, damn it. And if you believe the tales, they were. Or rather, now the town was.
That's not fair.
I know. It's
I just
bullshit.
thought this was a cool place for us Dudleys to kick it.
Though most of the original Dudleys, and by that I mean out of the 3 brothers, and I guess apparently the Martin Dudley guy that married into the Dudleys, they eventually, like, moved away and lived long and happy lives.
The Dudleyest Dudleys.
Dudleys.
The deadliest Dudleys.
They were one of those traveling shows like Buffalo Bill, but just nobody... they didn't have any skills, so that's why we don't remember them the same way. But yeah, they went around. The deadliest Dudleys are in town. Everybody's like, what?
Yeah.
So anyway, they all kind of moved on and did their own things, except for brother Abiel Dudley. He stayed in Dudleytown. His fortunes kind of grew and fell, but eventually he ended up losing everything. He was unable to pay any bills, so by the time he was in his 80s, his debtors took over his property, and he was left a ward of the town. We talked about wards of the town in at least one other, I think a couple other episodes. It's like, basically you were just homeless, but back then they would kind of throw you in like a community house. It was, a lot of times they were community house / mental asylum / like leper colony / it's just where they threw people that they wanted to go away.
AKA party pad.
Yeah. He went insane and began telling stories of strange creatures that would come out of the woods at night. ABL eventually died penniless and senile.
I believe
In fact,
if the guy's broke, then he has nothing to lose by making shit up like that.
And it doesn't say he tried to sell a script to Hollywood. It wasn't like he was trying to make shit up to get famous and rich. It was just... But in fact, a number of Dudleytown residents would end up losing their minds, which is a thing I was initially going to attribute to living in a creepy-ass woods small town with nothing particularly close by. But when I went on to read the ages of these that have gone insane, the individuals were like 84, 86, and one was 104 years old. So it's like, oh, this weird town where everybody goes insane. It's like, or, regular dementia when you're old. Even out of 26 households, this doesn't seem like over a 50-year period, 3 people going senile is an unusual
or common
occurrence.
Brain fuck.
Fuck, yeah. There was a family who resided in Dudleyville who ended up contracting a highly contagious disease, which wiped out their entire family and a large number of people in the town to which they had fled, which is terrible, but for the time was also extremely common. I mean... We're talking about back when I think this still predates the story we did on the doctor that literally invented medical hand washing. Mm-hmm. Like,
my hero.
Infectious diseases were pretty rampant. Yeah. One family, having left Dudleyville to relocate further west, was attacked by Native Americans who killed the father, wife, and infant daughter and kidnapped 2 older daughters and the son. The older daughters were ransomed, and the son ended up living with the tribe until he eventually married.
With a letter that just says, "We have Dudley."
Dudley. And everybody's like, who cares?
Which one? Fuck.
Yeah. They're trying to ransom him off, and they're trying to decide, was that one who we liked? I can't remember. But the one that ended up, they didn't let go, he ended up, and it was pretty common then, too, for their captors to just be incorporated into the tribe or whatever. And that's what happened. He ended up marrying a Indian woman, or Native American woman, I should say. But he was eventually sent back. Oh, and taken up to Canada, is where this tribe apparently was from. But anyway, he ended up being sent back to the States to get an education and went on to become like a United States Supreme Court judge or something. So that, yeah, like losing your whole family to slaughter is kind of bad luck, but it doesn't sound like he had an awful life after the fact. Plus, we've talked about this before too. All these stories about savage Native Americans brutalizing settlers. It's like most of that's kind of bullshit. Like, not that it didn't happen, but a lot of times it was in retaliation for us murdering them or somewhere along those lines. So anyway, make of that what you will. But that's all something that's brought up as part of this curse. It's like this one family lived there and then they got killed. But they didn't get killed in Dudleytown, so I don't see the connection, really.
Yeah, well, that's done, yeah.
Like I said, the town was abandoned sometime in the mid-1800s, but near the start of the 20th century, Dr. William Clark bought up a large amount of land, which included the former site of Dudleytown. So it was more than Dudleytown. It was a much bigger chunk of the area, land out there, but Dudleytown fell within the realm of what he bought. There he had a vacation home constructed, and he and his wife would use it as a getaway / summer home.
Dudley Manor.
Which is a pretty cool name. Like, I could see that being a BBC, like...
It's totally a haunted mansion sounding thing to me, for sure.
So one night while they were staying out there, Dr. Clark was called away on business. When he returned home, less than a day and a half later, it said 36 hours, he found his wife rambling incoherently about strange creatures she saw in the woods that night. she'd never regain her mental state, and within a week or two, she ended up committing suicide. William was gutted, but he still loved the area, so he eventually he didn't sell the house. He remarried and had a second home.
This is devastating, but man, what a view.
So he built a second home, and soon after he helped found the Dark Entry Forest Association, which I failed to put in my notes earlier. The woods themselves around Dudleytown were called the Dark Entry Forest because it was old growth. So, I mean, you're picturing these big trees. It was very shaded and dark, and I guess entry because they kind of led up the mountains. So that's a pretty badass name, Dark Entry Forest. And then you got to go with something like society, not association, but whatever.
Yeah.
But it was, I guess, him and like 42 other people that lived in the general area. And it was formed, basically for the conservation of the land. They wanted to make sure it didn't get developed because they were all people that appreciated, nature and the woods itself. But the Dark Entry Forest Association has still owned the land to this day. So anyway, most of this curse stuff certainly just sounds like normal things that happened to people back in the 17 and 1800s. We've talked about that a lot on this show.
Yeah.
It's easy to see things and kind of glamorize it, but it fucking sucked living back then. How the weirdest part to me about all the stuff that they mention as like possibly tied to the curse was the fact that somebody back then lived to the age of 104. Like,
God, why would you want to?
Right.
Like, I don't want to do that now. And it's like never been easier to be that old.
Right.
Like, I feel like you hit 40 back then. It's like, I'm about done.
Why am I still alive? Why am I here? So the curse can be pretty easily discounted because again, none of the Dudleys here had any actual ties to the Dudley who was executed by King Henry. And B, curses aren't real. But the story doesn't end there.
Then explain why we're still doing a podcast after 10 years.
That's very true. What I want to say, who could I have possibly pissed off? I pissed off a lot of people. There's a very good chance. Yeah. Huh. I might have to ruminate on that.
It's the worst curse ever, though, because it's just like you will wallow in minor internet obscurity for the rest of your days. And it's like, I'm cool with that, actually.
Yeah. Hell, you'll be forced to talk to one person outside your own family at least once a week. It's like, so I'm not a complete hermit. So anyway, the story doesn't end there, although it's not particularly shocking or exciting. After that, from as early as the 1940s, stories of paranormal activity in the area have surfaced. Visitors report seeing strange, wispy apparitions in the woods, or strange creatures, or hearing disembodied voices, feeling overwhelming sense of fear and dread. They've reported cold spots, EMF anomalies, strange lights. Psychics have described the area of having a hugely negative energy, and it's even been suggested that the area is home to some sort of portal to the other side. This is all stuff we've covered in other shows, even the portal thing. The people that believe in this will often believe that there's various, you can look up at like where ley lines cross and that kind of stuff. So this is one of those areas that's supposedly supremely haunted. Basically, if you play Ghost Bingo, you'd not only have a winning line, but you'd fill out the whole damn card. Because anything you can think of, there's been reports, people saying, oh, that happens there. So since the late 1990s, the Dark Entry Forest Association has closed the area to hikers. Thus, visitors to the area risk prosecution for trespassing, which it sounds like it's pretty stringently enforced as well, which has led to the speculation that they are a mysterious organization trying to hide the area's dark secrets. Except articles all over Google seem to suggest that you can still hike there to this day. That's not a problem. I put it, you can still hike there if you dare. But maybe don't dare, because as it turns out, Dudleytown is still inhabited, although it's not called that. And it's hardly a dark and mysterious place, though it is remote and private. But unfortunately, because humans suck, The town's reputation is perhaps its only real curse, as it has attracted so many curious visitors that, to the otherwise like pristine and serene and remote location, that like the forest has been all tromped up and torn up and trampled and defaced. The ruins of because there's still some foundations left from the homes of Dudleytown, but they've all been, spray painted and just vandalized and various things.
Cool.
Yeah. Litter everywhere, that kind of thing, which is why the Dark Entry Forest Association doesn't really want people tromping around the woods. It's not because we're hiding something. It's because you fuckers keep tearing it up. So it's like anything. You can't have something cool and interesting without people. I think I don't know if we've talked about it on air. We've talked about it off air. We both kind of like to hike, but neither of us are like, I wouldn't call myself a hiker. I'm not one of these.
I love the outdoors, but I'm very likely to be the guy who gets eaten by a bear one day.
And I don't know. I can't speak for you. I love going on trails, but I've not ever even done like the overnight where you hike and camp out and keep hiking.
I always thought that sounded cool, but also like so much fucking work.
That's the thing. And I've wanted to do it now that we have Lincoln, a 2-year-old. It kind of hampers that at least for a little bit.
Until she can whittle.
Until she can carry a fuking backpack. I'm not letting her go out with me until she can
craft a fishing rod out of the branches.
Right. But like I said, it's not to say I wouldn't do backpacking, but I haven't. But I do love nature, and I know you do too. And all the parks around here, it's like you have a nice park or a nice hiking trail or whatever, and you go, and it's just like cigarette butts and beer cans and shit everywhere. And it's like, it pisses me off to no end. I get it, because it's like you have the one nice thing and there's people out there that just don't give a shit. And
we are one with nature now, officially, because we throw our cigarette butts into shit.
And the cigarette butts would probably bother me less if people would stop starting massive fucking wildfires. Like, I can't complain. Ohio, we've been pretty spared from that, but that's the exact kind of activity that's causing so much problems everywhere.
To be fair, like, humanity's the type that, like, we could tell each other, like, hey, don't throw that cigarette butt out, and maybe, make sure you're not dragging your chains while you're driving. And because you said that, there will be some asshole who will literally, like, just throw like a torch into a field just to prove that he doesn't have to listen to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's how people are. That's how I was thinking about that today, because that's a lot of this masking stuff. Is people won't do it because you told them to, and you can't tell me what to do. It's not because it's actually difficult to do. It's that. Yeah.
I heard that shit from like Kyrie Irving about the vaccine. Or like, this isn't about whether the vaccine's good or bad or not. It's just that I don't like being told what to do. It's like, well, you're not being told what to do. You're a fucking multimillionaire. Go fuck yourself. Like, if you don't want to play basketball, that's fine. Don't get the shot. Right. Hide in your house. Like,
right. Yeah. It's anyway. That's not what my show is about. It's about Dudleytown and all the Dudleys. Dudley.
They weren't vaccinated either.
Yeah, well, obviously they weren't, because they were responsible for like 3 different plagues, apparently.
Dudley plague.
But that's really all I have. Like, it popped up on my radar because it's this haunted site. But the hauntings, quote unquote hauntings, are pretty standard and not all that interesting. The history behind it is, at least I thought it was.
As it usually is.
Yeah. Although it's a little different than what we've talked about before, where it's like there's this ghost story, but the story that it springs from was at least somewhat true, and that was interesting. This, like, the ghost stories and then going insane and the curse are mostly unrelated to the curse is just a very loose, like, yeah, some guy got beheaded, and you're like, oh, that sucks. And they realized it wasn't that good of a story. And they're like, and cursed.
And cursed.
And then the guy at the bar's like, you cursed a dead guy? He's like, no, they cursed his family and a town in America that had the same name for some reason. Like, I love to think of this like sentient curse. It's like,
just latches on to every asshole named Dudley.
Well, he lost the Dudley line in Europe. Like, he looked away for a second, looked back, and was like, fuck, where did Dudley go?
What was the name? Dudley? Dougie? Fuck.
And then he's just roaming the earth, and all of a sudden he walks down a path that says, "Welcome to Dudleyville." He's like, "Ha ha! Found you fuckers. Now this whole town is gonna pay." Although Stephen King had a short horror story that was really interesting about a guy that found out like he could write.
He was a Dudley.
Yes. It was about a guy that worked for basically like The Onion. And he started writing satirical obituaries for people. Like, it starts with like a celebrity that was known to get drunk all the time and just cause problems or whatever. And everybody could see that eventually the guy would like OD or something. And so the character writes this satirical obituary, but then the next day the guy dies, and it ends up happening again. He starts to realize that he has this power that if he writes an obituary for somebody, they end up dying. But in typical Stephen King fashion, to ruin the story for anybody that hasn't heard it, the more he does it, it's like the more powerful it becomes, and it starts killing like everybody with that name, not just the one that he was specifically referring to. And that was immediately what I thought of with this Dudleytown thing. It's like a curse so powerful that it doesn't fucking care as long as the name somewhat matches.
The name fits.
Right. But that's what I got this week.
I certainly no crazier than the like other widely accepted curses.
Right. I like
it's
how
just
all
as
of them
arbitrary.
And they're all like spun around an outcome that was very likely. Like all these mummy curses where they're like, oh, they entered this musty tomb with toxic mold that's been festering for thousands of years, and just a week later they were dead. Must be a curse. It's like, yes, it must be. But anyway.
Anywho, yeah. Watch your ass, Dudleys of the world.
Yeah. We're done with this curse. Now you're off to watch your other curse play football.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts. I think I did a pretty good job keeping it together when Jalen Hurts just threw another horrible interception that led to a Tampa Bay touchdown. So I'm exercising patience. I'm growing as a person, even though my team is god awful.
I wish football had like the hometown announcers like baseball does, so that they have all those stupid fucking catchphrases, so that every time that he throws an interception, the announcer said something like, "Oh, that's gotta hurts."
Whoopsie. Yeah.
Anyway.
Anywho.
So thanks for listening and humoring us for another week.
Thanks for letting us into your homes. Seriously. I've been eating everything in your fridge. Even the shit I don't like. Because I'm a good house guest.
Check that cottage cheese, though. I think it expired.
It did. So, I'm dying. Come back next week for my ghost story, where I died eating your rancid cottage cheese.
The story of the howling ass.
All right. Well, we're not topping that. Have a good week.
Toodles.